Hi, welcome to the Work Well, Live Well podcast. I'm your host, Leanne. Drawing on the foundations of wellbeing science, positive psychology and neuroscience, I share tools, tips and strategies for people to intelligently manage their wellbeing so they can flourish into working well and living well. In this episode, I'm talking to Dr Paige Williams about learning to thrive through disruption, challenge and change. Paige is an honorary fellow and researcher at the Centre for Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne. She uses the latest research in neuroscience, positive psychology and systems thinking to help leaders leverage their energy, attitudes and mindsets to benefit from the dynamic, complex and uncertain environment in which most organisations now operate. She is determined to help leaders move beyond just the need for resilience so that they can become anti-fragile. And this is the focus of her new book, Becoming Anti-Fragile. So let's get started. Thanks so much for joining me today, Paige.
Thanks, Leanne. It's great to be with you, and it's great to see you taking what we covered together in the MAP program and beyond and really putting it into effective action in the world. So I'm excited to be on the podcast with you.
Thank you. We're here today to talk about your book, Becoming Anti-Fragile. In this book, you refer to this new decade as being more complex, more uncertain, and we are affected more than ever by what you term as wicked problems. With these challenges before us, what does it mean to be anti-fragile?
So I'm calling this decade the decade of disruption. And I think that even before 2020 came and slapped us around the face and said, wake up, there were a lot of things that were aligning for this to be a decade where we really looked different coming out of it than we were going in. So there were some big social trends going on in terms of population density, in terms of the makeup of population, in terms of the difference in economic terms between the richest and the poorest. So all the parameters in our social systems were really getting stretched. Put into that things like changing dynamics brought about by technology, and just the pace and the complexity that we live our lives was just increasing. And there are these gaps that are appearing as we create a more complex and fast-paced environment in which we're living, because fundamentally our brains really are not designed, are not built to operate well in this kind of environment. And so we're creating an environment and a context that we can't actually cope with. We're seeing this in lots of different ways. We're seeing it with the amount of anxiety and depression in our populations, and that's across ages and stages of life development. Whilst I know a lot of emphasis is given to young people and their levels of anxiety and depression, it actually is across stages and ages of development. And we're seeing it in our societal systems as well, in terms of healthcare systems, in terms of what's happening in education, what's happening economically around the world. So we're really reaching this almost like this breaking point, which when you look at systems, sometimes they need to do that. They need to reach a point where things need to break enough for it not to be enough just to evolve, but actually for there to be some kind of transformation. And as we've come into 2020 and with COVID, it really feels that that's accelerated the pace and really brought to the surface the things that are most challenging for us about this context and this society that we've created. So how do we cope with all of that? To come to your question, what does it mean to be anti-fragile? Well, when we're in that kind of context where we've got disruption, we've got uncertainty, we've got complexity, and we've got a pace of change that we just can't keep up with, we can start to feel very fragile, and we can start to feel overwhelmed and like we can't cope with what's being asked of us. Certainly some of the mental health figures that we see coming out now suggest that we're beyond that point, that actually more and more of the population are feeling like they just want to stay in bed, thanks very much, and I'll stay under the doona because I cannot deal with what's going on out there. And that's what happens when we feel fragile. Now, if we can think of it on a continuum, if we kind of move up the continuum a bit, then we might feel that we can withstand what's being asked of us in our environment. And that means that we might feel robust. So I use the metaphor of like a lighthouse, you can kind of withstand the elements. Or you might be resilient. Resilient is another word that's used here. And I've taught resilience for over 15 years now. And the metaphor that we use is you're like a tennis ball. You know, you might take the hit, but then you can bounce back to where you were before. Now, that's a lot of energy to spend bouncing up and down to get back to where you were before. And this is where anti-fragile actually takes us beyond resilience. So when we are anti-fragile, we actually improve through the experience of disruption and uncertainty, and through what we learn from going through challenge and change. So we actually learn something that means that in some way we come out better than before. So it's actually improving through the experience of this complex and uncertain environment, rather than either breaking under the pressure of it because we're fragile, or just withstanding or bouncing back if we're robust or resilient. So that's the difference between fragile, robust, and anti-fragile.
I guess becoming anti-fragile doesn't happen overnight. You would expect to feel discomfort. Many people I speak to are feeling very uncomfortable. What are the principles that we can apply personally and professionally to help us become anti-fragile?
That's a great question, Leanne, because the thing is, we don't just become anti-fragile and it's kind of job done, that box is ticked and I'm on my way again. Because our levels of fragility, robustness, or how anti-fragile we feel, it's a dynamic relationship between the levels of motivation, our levels of ability, how confident we feel in our abilities, and how much support we feel we have. So our motivation, ability, and support to deal with the disruption, challenge, and change in our environment. Now, we don't just have one context. So it may be that in some environments, some contexts in our lives, we feel that it's pretty stable. There isn't a lot of disruption or uncertainty going on. And so, you know, we feel pretty confident in our capacity to deal with that. We feel pretty motivated and we don't actually need that much support. So because we have different contexts in our lives, there's going to be some places where we feel pretty comfortable, that we're coping okay, and other areas where we feel we're being really stretched and we need to kind of lean into this anti-fragile space. I describe it as a journey in the book, and it's a journey that you're going through your whole life, because as the disruption and uncertainty changes, because that's the nature of it, and as it ebbs and flows in different parts of your life. So maybe your home life is pretty stable, but you've got a lot going on at work, and that's where your anti-fragile energy and journey is going on right now. Or maybe it's the other way around, work's pretty stable, but you're moving house, or there's stuff going on with family members. That means there's a lot of disruption going on at home. So it's this idea that actually becoming anti-fragile is a lifelong journey. We're always learning forward. We're always thinking about new ways, and it's always being asked of us, because disruption, challenge, and change is around us in some context in our lives all the time.
You talk about robust in the book. Yeah. Would you be able to expand on that a little?
Because becoming anti-fragile is about dealing with uncertainty and disruption, we can't really use rules. Rules become kind of invalid, because that kind of thinking around, if that happens, then I'm going to do this. Well, the if and the then change, right? Because we're dealing with uncertainty and we're dealing with disruption and change.
Yeah.
So rather than having rules, what I've developed are 6 principles, and they're guiding principles, or what I call heuristics, which are kind of touchstones for us to use as we navigate uncertainty and disruption. And they spell out the word robust. Now, I'm very clear about this in the book. I am not a fan of acronyms at all, but I do know that our brains love them, because they're a real shortcut for us to understand a lot of information and remember information easily. So I had to give away my personal preference, and I've gone with robust. So the R of robust stands for recruit the brain. Now, I'm a firm believer in you can't fight physiology. So if we understand how our brains are wired, then firstly we can understand how sometimes that is unhelpful for us and doesn't help us deal with uncertainty, challenge, and change. And then on the other side, we can also harness and perhaps learn to manage more effectively how we can make the most out of the way our brains are wired to respond. So that's R. Then O is for operate in reality. Now, if The R deals with the physiology of our brains, and the O is about the psychology of our brains. So this is about what are the stories that we tell ourselves to try and make sense of what's going on in the world, and how sometimes can we get stuck in our stories rather than actually dealing with the reality of what's going on in front of us. And that can mean that that's unhelpful, and it means that actually we're kind of our own worst enemy. So operate in reality is about stripping away the stories so that we can move forward with the reality that is actually going on in front of us. Then the B, now it could actually be a double B in this version of robust, but I spell it with only one because there are two sides to the B. The first is break the negative. And one of the principles of anti-fragile is that sometimes not taking action is more powerful and potent than actually taking action. Certainly in our studies with positive psychology, we talk about PPIs, we talk about positive psychology interventions. And we have this tendency to want to intervene. We have this interventionist mindset where we think that doing something is the thing that's going to help most. And what break the negative is about is it has two sides to it. One is stop doing the stuff that's unhelpful. So cut out what's not effective, cut out what's not helping you move towards anti-fragility, cut out what's making you fragile, but also consider the option of doing nothing, just holding where you are and taking time to assess, okay? And then the other B you'll be super familiar with is build the positive. So this is about how is it we can be really aware of what our strengths and capacities are so that we have the tools and the resources and the energy to actually go on this journey to becoming anti-fragile. So we've got break the negative and build the positive as the B. The U of robust stands for use intelligent risk. So use intelligent risk acknowledges that when we're dealing with complexity and uncertainty, we cannot just do things the way that we've done them before. The thinking that got us here is not going to get us where we need to be. So use intelligent risk is about, okay, how is it that we can take risks, but understanding what we've learned from Recruit the Brain, how is it that we can do it in a way that means we still feel safe, so that we're actually taking small experimental steps and taking a real action learning approach to how we use risk in this complex and uncertain environment, and actually create options so that if one of our experiments absolutely fails, it doesn't take us out of the game. So that's use intelligent risk. Then the S stands for seek collective wisdom. And this is a really powerful one for leaders, whether we're kind of little L leaders in our own lives and in our own families and communities, or whether we've got formal leadership roles at work. Seek collective wisdom is about taking off that leadership cape and thinking that you have to do it all on your own. Because there's lots of evidence to suggest that the collective is always more anti-fragile than the individual. And part of that is because a collective allows us, one, to harness the collective wisdom that we have available in a group, but also because it means we've got more diverse perspectives. We get more options in terms of what might be a good way forward here. And in an uncertain and complex environment, that's going to make us more able to benefit from that uncertainty and complexity than to feel detriment from it, or than to feel pain from it. So seek collective wisdom. And then the final one, the T, stands for tackle the infinite game. The infinite game is one where we're actually thinking beyond the short term. We're actually thinking beyond ourselves. And it removes this idea that we're looking for a return on investment that's going to show up next week or next month or next quarter. Because that kind of thinking can make us fragile. It can make us make decisions that actually are not going to sustain outcomes over the longer term. The other thing it does is by tackling the infinite game over the long term and for the benefit of others, it removes ego. And ego is another factor that can make us very fragile because it turns us inwards rather than thinking about what's the contribution I can make and how is it I can serve that best through my actions. So that was as quick as I can make it for those 6 robust principles.
And each one of them I identified with as you we're talking through that, especially the stories that we build when we're challenged. We can be very quick to jump to assumptions, can't we? And let our minds get very busy with thinking things out of context, and it happens very quickly. And the other thing that stood out to me was the collective and how important that has been for me in times of struggle or challenge, and helping me to see things in a different way. When it's just myself, I might see that as a very narrow focus, whereas when perspective is brought into the arena, so to speak, we can see things a lot differently.
That's really the thing that helps to make us anti-fragile, is that if we're only seeing it one way, our way, then maybe something will come in left field, and we won't even have thought about that because our experiences or our beliefs or our values meant that we didn't see that that was even on the horizon or on the agenda. Whereas if we've got other people in the conversation, they might be able to say, hey, but what about that? Have you thought about that? And so we're able to take that into account as we come to solutions or think about what might be the risks or challenges that we're going to encounter as we go along this path. So each of those principles are a touchstone. And in the book, I provide 3 questions to hold for each of those principles, so 18 in total, to help bring it to life. So as you engage with disruption, challenge and change, how is it you can hold this question? And answering that question will guide you towards a certain pathway of action, or will help you have a particular perspective or attitude as you kind of deal with and navigate the uncertainty.
And that's something that I appreciated throughout the book, is those questions, because they prompt that action, don't they?
That's right. And the reason I use questions, I think questions are so powerful, because it's not about me prescribing to you, this is what you should do. It's a classic coaching technique where by asking the right question, you acknowledge that the answer is inside you. How you are best to navigate this complexity and uncertainty is within you. And if that means that you actually get a group of people together and you talk about it with the group, then that's the action that you need to take. But by asking these questions, then it's leaving the responsibility for the work for you to go on your anti-fragile journey still with you. And this is kind of like I'm your coach along the way. Helping you self-coach with these questions so that you can take the most effective pathway on the journey.
In the book, there are many strategies for navigating the path toward becoming anti-fragile. And you say that there are 3 building blocks for becoming anti-fragile, and they are energy, attitude, and mindset. Could you help us to understand that a little more?
When I wrote this book, I wrote it with everyone in mind. And they say that's not the thing to do. They say that when you write a book, you need to be writing it with one person in mind, right? So whether that's someone in your personal life, or if it's a client, you need to be writing it with one person in mind. So I tried that. And then I thought, actually, but no, I don't want it just to be for that person. I want there to be things in here that everyone can put into action, whether they're in a formal leadership role, because, my work is with leaders, it's with senior executives, it's with senior leadership teams. But the principles that we're talking about here apply just as much, no matter where you are in the organizational hierarchy, no matter whether you're working in a big organization, whether you're working for yourself, whether you are working on keeping your family well and happy, which is maybe the most important work that we can do. So these are really human principles rather than leadership principles. And so when I thought about, well, what does it mean for us to apply the robust principles to our own lives, then for me, and I've been playing with kind of energy, attitude, and mindset as the building blocks for how we show up in our leadering. And I talk about in the introduction the difference between leadering and leadership. And I sometimes refer to this as little L leadership as well. Leadering is what we do every day. It's the way we lead ourselves. It's the way we show up in the world. It's how we invite others into relationship with us. It's how we extend relationship with others and how we support. And so it's really taking responsibility for that. And I feel that the way that we can do that most is by understanding how we show up with our energy, with our attitudes, and with our mindsets. And if we can be intentional about how we do that, that's how we are leading in terms of self-leadership, and that's how we can leader others as well. So energy, attitude, and mindset, I believe, are the building blocks for any kind of leadership change or leadership work that we can do. They're the most powerful and potent leverage points. And they're also ideas that are pretty accessible to people. You know, if I talk about energy, people generally know what I mean. If I talk about attitude, it's the same. And even mindsets now, something that used to be kind of quite in the positive psychology space with growth mindset. But now the term mindset is pretty generally understood. So in terms of using them as the building blocks to become anti-fragile, and what I thought about was, okay, what would it mean if we applied those robust principles specifically to energy, attitude, and mindset? So I'll give you an example. So if we think about anti-fragile energy, we know that becoming anti-fragile is a lifelong journey. We know that it doesn't ever go, because there's always some kind of disruption or change or uncertainty in our context that we need to kind of apply our anti-fragility to. So in my mind, it was about, okay, so what does it make sense that we apply from the robust principles? And one of the aspects of use intelligent risk is having these options that I talked about, having optionality so that we don't just have one idea, we've got multiple pathways to achieve what we want to achieve. And so when we think about energy, that's what we need to have, is multiple pathways. One of the ways that we can do that is not just by focusing on physical energy, which is often what we think about, but actually to focus intentionally on building both emotional energy and mental energy as well, so that if, for example, we're feeling a bit depleted on one, we've got two other energy sources to keep us going. So right now, as we're kind of grappling with the challenges and restrictions around COVID, perhaps our mental energy is really feeling a bit depleted. You know, maybe we're spending a lot of time in front of Zoom screens. Maybe it's the having to manage children's schooling at home or whatever. And so then it becomes even more important for us to understand how we can build emotional energy and how we can generate physical energy, so that overall our kind of energy bucket is still kept pretty full. So that's one of the ways we can kind of use one of the anti-fragile principles and think about how can we apply it in our own lives. And in the book, I talk about different ways that we can focus on physical, emotional, and mental energy, and how we can apply the robust principles to doing that as well. So that's the energy piece. Attitudes are, they're kind of like our inner Judge Judy. They're the way that we make decisions about whether we're going to move towards something or away from something in the world. So the easiest way that I find to describe this is if I say Brussels sprouts, you know what your attitude is towards Brussels sprouts. You know whether you're going to go, yum, 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 I'd like some of that, please, or you're going to go, ugh, no, thank you very much. I also find that another good prompt to use is Donald Trump, and people generally know what their attitude is towards those two words and that person as well. So that's how we bring attitudes to life, right? Some of them we are conscious of. Some of them we know what our attitudes are, but some of them we're not. They are what are called implicit attitudes. They're kind of less conscious. When we think about the attitudes that are going to help us become anti-fragile, they are confident attitudes, they're constructive, and they're courageous. Okay, confident, constructive, and courageous attitudes are what are going to help us lean in to this idea that actually, as we experience challenge, we can sit with the struggle of that, and we can actually move forwards, understanding that in some way we'll learn and be better coming from that. Now, if we think about constructive attitudes and we apply, let's say, the B is break the negative, build the positive. How is it that as we think about being constructive, we can look for what's working well here? Okay. One of the principles in Build the Positive is taking a strengths-based approach. So as we look to be constructive, as we look to move forward, even through complexity and uncertainty, how is it we can hold that question? Okay, how can I look at what's already working here and use that as the basis for me to move forward from? So that we don't just get caught in this pit of despair where it feels overwhelming. We're actually looking for the thing that's working and to build forward from there. So we stay in this constructive attitude.
Attitude really does change the experience. I can have an attitude of, not wanting to be part of whatever is before me, or I can have an attitude to view it through a different lens, and then the experience is very different for me.
Yeah, and it connects back to those stories that you were talking about, Leanne, in terms of, your attitude often shows up in what's the story that you're telling yourself about what's going on here, and whether you want to move towards it or away from it. And so this understanding that, actually, if I focus on, if the story I'm telling myself in here is it's all rubbish, nothing's working, it's hopeless, then that's not going to move you to constructive action. Whereas if you take this constructive attitude of, actually, what I'm looking for here is, what are the things that are working? There might only be one or two, but what are the things that are working? What can I take from that that's enabling that, even if it's a very small piece that's working, and how can I apply that more broadly to help more things work in this situation? Okay, so you can see how it's this constructive attitude that kind of brings this forward momentum to life.
Moving on to mindset, how does that fit in the picture?
Yeah. So mindsets, the simplest way I think to describe mindsets is the word should. All right. Mindsets generally give you an insight into how you feel the way the world should work. Okay. So they're the lens through which you kind of view the world. They're your values and they're your beliefs, and it's how you understand the world operates, right? Which is where this word should comes in. Yeah. Now, if we think about what that means in terms of becoming anti-fragile, one of the things perhaps that we hold as a mindset is that we shouldn't have to experience struggle. We shouldn't have to experience change and challenge. Life should be comfortable. Now, in the environment that we live in now, in the decade of disruption, that's not actually a very helpful mindset to have, because regardless of what you think the world should be, the world is what it is. So this ties back to operate in reality. Yeah. In disruption, challenge and change, in the decade of disruption, whether you think the world should or shouldn't be like this, it just is. So this is where the work of Carol Dweck and understanding and engaging a growth mindset around understanding that actually we are able to learn and grow and adapt over the course of our lifespan. And that actually, as we get opportunities and perhaps things don't go as well as we might want them to, as we're butting up against the experience of challenge and struggle, how is it we can hold that as a possibility for learning and growth? How is it that we can see that as a possibility for us to be better, to actually engage that growth mindset, and rather than being fearful of it, firstly, be accepting that it's there. And then secondly, actually look for the opportunity. So engage with it, let go of those, this shouldn't be happening to me, this should be different, accept that it is what it is, and then actually lean into that growth and learning opportunity. Because that mindset is going to melt away resistance, right? And resisting the amount of complexity and uncertainty that's going on in our environment is just futile. It's just an absolute energy pit, as in you can just keep trying to fill it with this resistance, but you're never going to stop the reality of what's going on. So the part of the anti-fragile mindset brings to life, firstly, this kind of operate in reality principle of understanding that, look, the way the world should be is the way the world is, and accepting that. And then it's this idea of using intelligent risk and getting comfortable with things not going perfectly, getting comfortable with failing, and then seeing that as an opportunity for learning, growth and development. So the idea of a growth mindset is just one aspect of the anti-fragile mindset. And another part of the anti-fragile mindset is being reflective and actually taking the time to really be aware of what's going on here and now, and not just in our heads. And actually consciously going through the learning loop where we try new things, we assess how they go, and then we adjust. And we do that in a very mindful and reflective way, so that we're not just kind of skimming over the top of life. We're actually in the journey, experiencing it and aware of what's going on, so that we can really take that learning forward. Because when you think about it, from any experience that we have, the learning is the thing that's portable. the learning is the thing that stays with us from that experience, and that we can really continue to get value from. That's the piece of the anti-fragile mindset that really helps us be able to cope more effectively with uncertainty and complexity.
Yeah. And in your book, you talk more about that learning loop, which people can refer to. You have a survey available, which I have taken, and the listeners can take at the antifragilesurvey.com. What will they learn from this survey?
This is me wanting to help people understand how they can, rather than just survive the experience of life, actually get better through it, and maybe even learn to thrive through it, even if it is uncomfortable. I felt that the survey to go alongside the book would be the most effective way to get anti-fragile into the heads, hearts and hands of as many people as possible. So you're right, it's at www.theantifragilesurvey.com. It takes less than 10 minutes. And at the end of it, you get a personalized and tailored results report. It positions you on the anti-fragile map. So in relation to your responses, it tells you where you are in terms of how you're coping with the level of disruption in your life, and how you feel you're going in terms of your motivation, ability and support to deal with that. It also lets you know how you're going in terms of putting each of the robust principles, bringing them to life and putting them into action in your life. And then it gives you an overview of where you are in terms of anti-fragile energy, attitudes and mindset. So right at the front of the report, you get a page that's just a dashboard of each of those results. And then you get some ideas and some description around what your results mean, and what strategies you could perhaps use to move forward in your journey. And one other thing is that it also tells you how your anti-fragility and your use of the robust principles and anti-fragile energy, attitudes and mindsets impacting things like your life satisfaction, your work satisfaction and your engagement. So some outcomes that are pretty relevant for us in everyday life, but also in terms of our work context.
And the questions, again, prompt us to think about how we can start to move forward with shifting their scores.
That's right. And they're meant to be kind of thought provokers, you know, but where could you possibly start? And, you know, the reason that the survey is free is really to help people. They're not to be any barriers for us to start doing this work together, and to help people understand where they can start. And so the final section of the report is about how can we create effective behaviour change around becoming anti-fragile, but really with any aspect of our lives. And so I feel that that's a helpful thing to try and get onto as many people's tool belt as possible.
Besides your own fantastic book, is there a book, a TED talk, words of wisdom or strategies that you could share that might be helpful to listeners today?
So I've just read Glennon Doyle's Untamed, and that was amazing and really interesting in terms of us kind of letting go of those shoulds, and understanding where some of our shoulds have come from. So that was a really interesting read that I've done recently. I also love Eckhart Tolle's Stillness Speaks. And I think that in the complex and fast-paced world that we've created for ourselves now, that this understanding that actually we need to tune back in, and we need to find the stillness within and actually take the time and create the space to do that. I talk about mindfulness on the journey to becoming anti-fragile, and that's what this book really is all about, is finding deep peace in the stillness and listening to who we are rather than keeping ourselves busy with the external world.
I haven't read either of those, so I'll pop them on my reading list. Paige, how are you taking care of your well-being?
So I am sitting with the struggle. When I'm not feeling okay, I'm acknowledging I'm not feeling okay. I'm trying not to eat too much chocolate in those moments, but sometimes I do. And that's okay as well. And even in those moments where I am in the struggle, I'm trying to walk my own talk. And as I'm in the struggle, I'm asking the question, why this struggle and why now? So that I'm getting some learning from it, like what's been the trigger, why is it at this point that I'm feeling, particularly impacted by what's going on? What are the stories, and how much of the struggle I'm experiencing right now isn't real? It's because of what I'm telling myself, and how hooked in am I to that story, and why? I might pause and give myself space to not be as productive, to not be as aligned to my exercise goal or my healthy eating plan or whatever. Even as I'm allowing myself to kind of go, boo sucks to all of that, I'm still actually sitting with the, okay, but what is this stuff that I'm struggling with, to get some learning from it. I think the thing I'm doing is learning to be okay with not being okay, but also learning from being okay with not being okay.
I love that. I love that. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. And if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to find you?
My website is drpaigewilliams.com, and there's a contact form that comes directly to me. So that might be the most effective way for people to understand the type of work that I do and to reach out and make contact that way. And also there's a contact form on the Anti-Fragile survey. But thank you, Leanne. It's been such a joy chatting with you today.
And thank you for joining me. To find out more about Paige, visit her website www.drpaigewilliams.com. There you'll find details about her book, Becoming Anti-Fragile, and the link to the Anti-Fragile survey that you can take for free. If you found this podcast of benefit, please share it with someone that you think will benefit too. I love to receive your feedback and would be grateful if you could rate this podcast on iTunes. I invite you to connect with me through LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, wishing you well-being. Bye for now.